Hey everybody, and welcome back to my channel, where today we are going to be discussing how I rate books. So recently I was watching a video that Mari over at My Name is Marines put out. And if I can remember the video, I will put it down below, and I will link Mari's channel down below as well. But in it, she basically said, first of all, that ratings can never be objective, which I wholeheartedly agree with. But the other thing that she said was also that, and I'm paraphrasing because Mari is far more articulate than I am, but basically that ratings are useless unless you know how a person, like what their rating system is. And I also agree with that. And I realized I have never explained how I rate books, and so I figured I should remedy that. So let's go ahead and just talk about how I rate books. So first up, I rate out of 5 stars. This is because I didn't used to rate books, and then I joined Goodreads, and then I did rate books. And so I followed Goodreads' model. Now it has evolved over the years, and I do rate using quarter stars up to quarter stars. And like even on Goodreads, I will just make a note of it in like the review section if it's a quarter star review. But essentially, it's 5 stars. So 5 stars to me and my system means I loved it. There was a strong emotional connection to the book, and there were no major issues. Nothing that really drew me out of the story. 4 stars means I really liked it. And the only reason that I'm docking it down from a 5 stars is either it had some major issues, maybe, or maybe not major issues, but definitely big enough to kind of pull me out of the story, or I lacked that strong emotional connection. So I have rated books 4 stars that were really, really well written because I just didn't connect with it. But I still really like it, right? So then 3 stars is I like it. And usually books that are 3 stars fall into 2 different categories. Either it's category 1, which is there's some good things and there's some bad things, or category 2 is it's aggressively okay. 2 stars to me is I don't like it. There are more problems than not with the book. And then 1 star is just I hate it. There's either massive, just completely major issues with it, or it's downright problematic. And so that's kind of how I use the stars and where everything kind of falls in them. Now, if you've been around on my channel for a while, you may have noticed that I very, very rarely rate under 3 stars. And I kind of wanted to mention this because I know that some people don't rate under 3 stars because they basically give participation points to authors. Like, yay, you finished a book, you should get at least 3 stars. And that's not me. And I want to make it very clear that that's not me. But the reason that I don't generally rate under 3 stars is actually because I mostly DNF those books. I am aggressive about DNFing books that aren't working for me. And if you're new around here, like really, like in 2021, it's May and I've DNF'd 21 books already. Like I try a wide variety of books, and I am really quick to say this isn't working for me, and just DNFing it and just not worrying about it. And so by DNFing books early that aren't working for me, it does screen out a lot of the books that would be in the 2 or 1 category for me. The only times that things have sneaked in under 3 stars is frequently because the ending was bad. The ending was bad enough to make me dislike the book, or it's a book that my kid picked out and I'm not loving it, but I'm not allowed to DNF those ones. And those are really the only 2 categories that tend to crop up when I'm rating below 3 stars. So it's just that I'm aggressive about DNFing, and that's really the only reason why. I don't hate read, so there you go. So then let's talk about the factors that I consider when I rate things. So first up, world building. I'm really into world building, so like Is it interesting? Does it make sense? Is it well thought out? Um, Characters and like just do the characters make sense? Are they do they develop in a realistic way through the book? How are the character interactions? Do they make sense? Are they interesting? The plot, again, is it interesting? Does it make sense? Is it too heavily reliant on like plot conveniences? And then I also consider writing style, the structure, and the pacing. And mostly is that, does it make sense for the story that is being told? To some extent, I do consider themes, although not always, because I'm not great at picking out themes. Like sometimes I can and sometimes I can't. So when I can, I do consider it. And it's all, themes are always in relation to like all the other elements that I'm looking at. And then lastly, I do consider my enjoyment of the book, because I think that sometimes you can't quite capture how much you enjoy a book from looking at all these other elements. There's just something about a book, right? So when I am thinking about these things, I think what stands out to me, either because it's good or because it's bad, right? And like, and then it's for the good things, it's like, is it good because I like it, or is it good because it was effective for the story? Like, it's both, those are both good, but those are good for different reasons, right? And sometimes you'll find things where I like it and it's effective, but not always. Um, and then, like, if it's something I don't like, I do try to consider whether it's a me thing. Is this a personal problem, or is this more of a universal, more people than just me would have this issue as well? And I try to consider all of those things. For some of you, that you might think that this sounds kind of very similar to Cawpile, which is a rating system that is used by G over at Book Roast. And I can absolutely see that, but it's not quite the same, mostly because I don't generally, the categories that G came up with, I don't necessarily think about my books in that way. So it just doesn't really work for me. But it is, in some ways, very similar. But the other way that it is different is actually how I end up actually rating the book. So generally speaking, when I sit down to read a book, I read it. But in the back of my head, I do recognize whether I'm enjoying it, whether I'm not, what's working for me and what's not. Now, it's not like an extensive list necessarily, because I'm trying to focus on the reading. But I also very rarely read a book in one sitting. And so in the off time when I'm not reading, I do kind of process and decide how I feel about the book up to that point. And again, what's working and what's not. So when I get to the end of a book, I generally have a gut feeling of what I want to rate it. And then I think about it. So I have a gut rating, or a gut reaction to what rating it should be. And I sit on it for a while and I think about it. And because what I'm looking for is, okay, for example, how is the elements that weren't done well, how does it affect the story? Because that's a big thing for me. Because you can have terrible characters and it doesn't actually matter for the story. So for example, if I have two books and they both have poorly written characters, but book one is a book that is not at all, like, it's not about the characters at all. It's all about the plot. We're doing some really interesting things with the plot, and the characters are good enough for that plot to drive forward. That's one thing. If I have book two over here where it is also got bad characters, but those characters are frequently interacting with each other, we're trying to have emotional scenes, for instance, that's a book that's much more reliant on having good characters. And that, then, to me, the second book should absolutely be rated lower than that first book, because the story that the author is trying to tell is no longer as effective because they didn't write their characters well. Does that make sense? Like, I want to make sure that those I'm taking into account, like, whether the elements that I found to be not great actually matter to the story that's being told. And so that's why I kind of sit and think about it. And that's also why I don't use Cawpile, because it doesn't really account for that. And so I that's kind of how I think about it. And then from there, I kind of settle on my final rating. And I'm generally really good with that, because that final rating, I feel usually I feel like I can effectively justify why I gave it that rating. And so then I move on from there. So then occasionally, just so you know, I do run into situations where my enjoyment of a book does not match the writing craft of the book. And so frequently I will cite Grimspace by Anna Geary for this, because it is a hot mess that I enjoyed in spite of itself. I really, really liked it. And looking at my enjoyment level, it was like a 4-star read. But looking at like the craft of it, it was like 2 to 3 stars. And I didn't feel comfortable rating it 2 stars, but I really didn't feel comfortable rating it 4 stars. And so usually what I end up doing in that is I will sit with that for a little bit longer and really kind of figure out where in that range I'm going to rate a book. In the case of Grimspace, I did end up rating it 3.75, which is really high. And I basically put a ton of caveats in place of it's a hot mess. There's so much going on that's not great. But the reason I settled on something so high is because I recognized that I would recommend trying it to anybody who is willing, as long as you go in with the expectations that it is a hot mess, and it may not be a hot mess that you enjoy. But I want everybody to try it, and so I rate it a little bit higher. Similarly, but kind of on the opposite end of the enjoyment spectrum, is like The Final Empire, and by Brandon Sanderson. I didn't enjoy that book. It was 2 stars. But looking at it, I recognize the craft of the writing is not a 2-star read. And so for that one, I ended up rating it 3 stars, because I recognized that the things that Brandon Sanderson did well were things that I just didn't care about. And the things that I do care about in a book were the things that he didn't do well. So it was just a mismatch. And so I ended up rating it higher because I didn't want to discourage anybody from reading it because I didn't enjoy it, right? When it's not that I didn't enjoy it because it was poorly written, it's just because it wasn't written in a way that I was ever going to connect with. So that's kind of what I do in weird situations. They don't crop up all that often, but I wanted to let you know for that. And then the last thing that I wanted to mention is that sometimes my reviews do come out as like hypercritical, because the thing is, if I notice something is not great, I will mention it. Now, I am trying to be better about this, where I mention like, I noticed this, but it didn't affect the story. Or I noticed this, but it didn't affect my enjoyment, or any of those things, because I do recognize that like sometimes it comes off very strange, because it'll be like, and this is a problem, and this is a problem. Oh, and this too. And this was great, but this is a problem. But I really enjoyed it, 4 stars. And that doesn't really make sense. It's something that I know that I do, and so I am working to correct it. But generally speaking, I do point out things that I notice that are not great, mostly because I'm doing reviews for you guys, right? Like, for anybody who comes across them. And I don't want you to walk into a book with unrealistic expectations, especially if it was something that I noticed. I don't want you to walk away and then read the book and say, why didn't anybody tell me? It's one thing if I didn't notice it. I can't tell you about things that I don't notice, but I would feel horrible if I did notice it, didn't say anything, and then it was like a serious problem for you. So that's why I do it. But I am trying to find that balance of how to be critical of a book and mention the things that I do notice while not appearing to hate every book ever. um, yeah, it's a work in progress. We'll go. But that in general is how I rate my books. So that's it, you guys. Leave me comments down below. I would love to hear how you rate books, whether it's out of 5 stars or something completely different. Do you not rate books at all? Like, I find that fascinating. So let me know down below. But that is all I have. So if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. And until next time, have happy reading. And I will see you in the next video. Bye.